Bob. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. We'll get started and see if other folks coming in. I see Karina just joined, so at least we have a quorum to get going. So my computer seems to be got a little lag in it. I hope you can all hear me and or see me. Hearing is most important. Welcome. This is a meeting of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on the Future of Lake Champlain. I'm Mark Nod, Chair. We're going to adjust our agenda again a little bit. So we have a first presentation update on aquatic invasive species from Meg Modley and Oliver Pearson. And then we'll move to public comments, vote on our minutes, and then go straight into retreat planning, because I know a number of our members need to leave, and I want to be sure we have a chance to discuss that planning date before we lose a quorum, and then we'll move into the rest of the meeting agenda. So unless anyone has anything more, and as long as it's okay for any public guests, for us to move right into aquatic invasive species, and that way Oliver and Meg can move on to their next meetings. I think they've got a tight evening. So any concerns, any comments about making that adjustment to the agenda? Okay.
Oh, fine.
So we'll dive right in then. Oliver, I think you have the greatest time constraints. If you want to maybe start, and then Meg can follow up from there and leave time for questions. And I'll just let you sort of field questions, as long as you can see chat room and raised hands. Okay?
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Excellent, thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Meg, for letting me go first. I'm Oliver Pearson. I manage the Lakes and Ponds programs at Vermont DEC. Nice to be with all of you, and thanks for the opportunity. Mark asked me to speak about aquatic invasive species prevention and management work in the state of Vermont, and I'll jump into that quickly, and then I'll hand off to Meg or take any questions. Yeah, I do have another meeting after this, so I'll be as brief as possible. So the overall story is one of an increase and a decrease working together that isn't great as a combo. The slide I put up shows sort of the trends with aquatic invasive species in our water bodies in Vermont over time. So you see the real increase in Eurasian water milfoil, which is now over 100 water bodies in the state, with a few new introductions in 2022 and a few other invasive species increasing on a much more limited basis, but we'd never like to see them anywhere new. So these slight increases in water chestnut, for example, is never a good thing. So we are in a period of increase, and I'm sure Meg will talk about some of the other threats that are knocking on the door here in Vermont. Sort of combined with that, if I can get the slide to advance, here we go. Is a funding picture, which is sort of heading in the opposite direction right now, and has some other risks associated with it. There's a lot going on in this slide, but the upper left graph just shows you, probably driven by the increase in infested water bodies, we have an increasing number of municipal participants and lake associations in our grant and aid program. And I'll talk a little bit about how that's funded in a minute, but that's a statutory program to help communities, help lake associations, help municipalities deal with aquatic invasive species. So the number of participants is going up. People usually say, that's great, we have more participants, but as this is sort of a problem-driven grant fund, having more participants isn't necessarily a good thing. Then the graph in the upper right shows sort of that increase in the total cost of all these grant applications we get from participants, which is the red line, So we get the applications in annually, and the ask has gone up over time. And then the blue line is the amount of funding we actually have to award these grants, which is very static. So that funding comes from two sources primarily. We get some funding from the motorboat registration funds. Those funds are split between DEC, Fish and Wildlife, Agency of Ag, Agency of Transport, but we get about $260,000 a year from that fund specifically for the grants. And then we also get another 100,000 a year from the Army Corps from a broader invasive species control program that's focused on the Champlain Basin that we use to top up those grants. So that's you do the math, that's about $350,000. Up until 2022, we were able to award another $100,000 worth of grants up to 450K because we had some surplus aquatic invasive species funds from a one-time double payment. I'll spare the details there, but we ended up one year getting the amount from the Army Corps and the same amount from the state that we used. We held that in reserve and used it for the grants. The legislature didn't like this big unspent balance on our books, so we were told to spend that down, which we did to the tune of $100,000 a year. So that surplus allowed us to award another 100,000 through the end of 2022. That surplus is now depleted, and so at the bottom here you can see sort of our DEC grant amount from 2017 to this upcoming summer, and it's fluctuated between 400 and 450,000. We get a lot of match or leverage from the municipalities and the lake associations who want to do these projects, and use what we get to really match on a 3-to-1 basis and increase the overall impact of these projects. And that often comes from municipal funds, local taxes, lake association contributions, etc. So now in 2023, we're looking at 350,000 only going out the door because of that surplus being depleted and no other funds being made available to fill that surplus. The grant and aid funds, as you may know, excuse me, I would say just over the majority of them go to fund greeter programs. Greeters, what we in the inland lakes, we call them greeters. The basin program, as Meg will tell you, refers to them as stewards, but that's the people meeting at the access areas, doing education and outreach about aquatic invasive species, inspecting boats, doing some, in some cases, some decontamination work. So that's what we've seen to be a very effective way to prevent the spread of AIS. So we like to fund as many greeter programs as we can on inland lakes. We use some of it for management projects, anything from mechanical harvesting of milfoil to supporting sort of larger scale projects using other non-chemical means of aquatic invasive species control, and then a little bit of research and other types of preventative work and education and outreach work. So that's where our grant funds go. And those usually amounts to about 40 to 45 awards that we at DEC administer. And so, we're not at all thrilled that the 2023 grant fund is $100,000 less than previous years. And what I want to draw people's attention to is the grant fund is only made up with funds from the motorboat registration fees and the Army Corps of Engineer grants. We have two staff, which I'll talk about in a second, working on aquatic nuisance control permitting and aquatic invasive species work. They're also funded by the motorboat registration funds, as well as a little bit of the Army Corps grant, which we're allowed to use for administration. And we only get $25,000 a year in general fund for the aquatic invasive species prevention efforts statewide. And we use that to fund one summer seasonal employee. And the permitting revenue from our aquatic nuisance control permitting is de minimis. The municipalities are typically exempt under our current fee structure. And the permits where we do actually get to charge the fee are, $50 here, $150 there, not nearly enough to fund a person. And so the state's contribution, other than making motorboat registration funds available, is limited to $25,000 a year for aquatic invasive species prevention and management activities. That seems low to me, given the importance that the state is now placing on outdoor recreation as a driver of our economy, our economic growth, of employment creation, et cetera, and the potential negative impact of AIS on the recreation economy. That seems low to me, given the large contributions we're asking our lake associations and our municipalities to make for these projects to succeed. And I think they would say the same thing. They would say the state needs to step up and do more to help us deal with the negative impacts of aquatic invasive species in our public waters. And finally, it was nice to see on March 1st, the House Energy and Environment Committee had a hearing with Secretary Moore basically on the ANR budget. The water office, the Office of Water Programs within DEC budget came up for discussion. That's the Office of Water Programs refers to the Watershed Management Division and the Water Investment Division. And Secretary Moore was asked a number of questions by the committee about AIS funding and AIS staffing. And so in response to that, I put this table together, which just shows how the number of full-time equivalent or FTE staffing working on aquatic invasive species prevention and management and aquatic nuisance control permitting has decreased over time. So the numbers speak for themselves, but back in 2007, 2012, we had 4. That's decreased down to 1.5 through last year. And we're back up to 2 with Kim Jensen leading our AIS prevention and management work, being supported by Olin Reed, who's taking on the aquatic nuisance control permitting, as well as helping Kim with the greeter program. So we've put that all together because that's all part of the statute 10 VSA 50, which governs AIS prevention and management activities in the state of Vermont, both permitting, some of the transport rules, et cetera. So in terms of the slides, that's all I really had to share. I think we are doing the best we can with these limited resources to respond to AIS outbreaks, rapid response and early detection work, to keep to keep water bodies that aren't infested that way through greeter programs and limit the spread. We are lucky to have some other federal grants, which I haven't mentioned yet, with very specific purposes. We get some Lake Champlain Basin program funding and Army Corps money for water chestnut control primarily, and some U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grants that have a bit of flexibility for work around the state. So all together, when you add up the different federal grants, it's about a $1 to $1.2 million annual program, including the motorboat registration funds for both grants and salaries. But only 25,000 of that comes from general funds, and overall, it's inadequate to achieve everything we want to achieve with AIS prevention and management in the state. So we're cobbling together a program, doing the best we can, but we're falling short in some areas due to resource constraints. So I think I'll stop there, Mark, and happy to take any questions or if there's any specific areas you want me to provide more information on, I'm happy to do that as well.
Why don't we go to any questions? I have a first initial question. So if we're talking about $1 million annually in motorboat registration fees, of which 20%, $200,000 or so, supports the grants, plus an additional approximate amount for management purposes?
Yeah, it's complicated. So the overall motorboat registration pool that the state gets is, I think, around 1.5 million a year, which is divided up between ANR, Agency of Ag, Transport, and within ANR, some goes to Fish and Wildlife, and then 37% of the overall total comes to DEC. And of that 37%, you split it into 2 pots. The slightly larger pot, $250K, is for grants. The slightly smaller pot, $210K, is for internal management or salary costs. The 1 to 1.1 million figures, when you add up motorboat plus all the different federal grants we get, plus the little bit of general fund, the annual AIS prevention budget within the state is probably about 1.1 million per year right now, of which 450K, 460K roughly comes from motorboat, and the rest is largely from federal grants.
Okay. All right, thanks. And anybody have any questions for Oliver right now?
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's Carol Odie. Is that $25,000, does that come from the money that is set aside for the Clean Water Fund, from the Clean Water Fund?
Yeah.
Or is that only general fund?
Yeah, great question. That's general fund. Up until now, AIS projects are not on the list of eligible projects for use of clean water funds. We did have some members of the public provide testimony at the last Clean Water Board meeting saying that's a policy decision that DEC took, asking if that decision could be revisited. And Secretary Moore did indicate that the Clean Water Board is going to take another look at that question, with the good news of the clean water funds increasing over the last few years, largely driven by some improved receipts, higher receipts than expected, and some federal largesse, combined with sort of the stagnation and now decrease of AIS funds. It does raise the question, how do we do a better job of preventing AIS? Maybe if we can use clean water funds, but that would require a change in policy by the state of Vermont, which is
okay. So when is the meeting where they discuss that, the Clean Water Board?
They're going to discuss it at their next meeting, which I don't have that date at my fingertips, but I can get that back to you.
To me, I think, Chair, that we need to know that, and I think that we need to show up at public comment or write a letter and ask that to go into clean water funding. And then the second thing I want to make is, right now there's a bottle bill that the legislature is considering it, and I think that I'm working to try to make the extra money that would come in from expanding that bottle bill from the escheats go to the Clean Water Fund, which is where the rest of the escheats go. But there is an effort to set up a new producer responsibility organization and have the first 5 years of that increase in escheat revenue go to solid waste, which helps clean water too in the end. But I'm working on making sure that we get some of that money going as an increase toward clean water. But anyway, I don't know how I'll do with that. But the point I want to make is that aquatic invasives is water quality, and I think it should be part of that. I mean, fine to have 25,000 come from the general fund, but it also should come from maybe 25 is from the general fund, but we need additionally money from the Clean Water Fund. So I think that this group has got to fight for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thanks for your work to increase the clean water funds through the S-cheats, and if some of those funds could flow to AIS projects, that'd be great. One thing I forgot to mention, I was remiss. We do have a new challenge. I alluded to it in my opening remarks. In February, we received a letter from the Coast Guard saying that use of motorboat registration funds for things like AIS prevention and management is not in compliance with federal statute. And federal statute says you can only charge fees associated with registering motorboats that are used for the cost of actually registering those boats. So what many states have done, including Vermont and some of our neighbors, of adding additional costs to motorboat registration to do very sensible things like improve access areas, keep aquatic invasives out of the water, to improve the boating experience. Those costs are again, not in compliance with federal statute. They asked us to stop doing that. They threatened to withhold a larger recreational boater safety grant, which goes to the office, the Marine State Police Marine Division, if we don't comply with that. And they wanted us to submit a corrective action plan earlier this month in response to that. I think we have a few years to figure that out, but we are looking at losing the motorboat registration funds that we currently get, unless we come up with some sort of creative solution, which is possible. We do know that House 51, I believe, which was introduced to create a new source of revenue for aquatic invasive species through a sort of conservation sticker or decal program, is not supported by the administration, Governor Scott's administration, because it's a new fee. But perhaps one solution for this problem of the Coast Guard is to decouple the motorboat registration funds that are used for AIS and other purposes from motorboat registration itself, and find another way to charge those fees, which would be perhaps seen as not necessarily a new fee if we made that change, but just switching a fee around to comply with federal statute. But that's an issue that's where we have to deal with the next year or two, and it's threatening basically half the revenue we get today for aquatic invasive species. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in my opening remarks.
All right, that sounds like a great idea. And so I think, at our retreat, if we could do work on that, it'd be great, in my opinion. Okay, I'm going to just go to mute now.
Thanks, Carol. I think Hillary, I think you had your hand up next.
Hey, Oliver, good to see you tonight.
Hey, Hillary.
Some exciting things, I guess, mixed in with everything else. I'm curious about the number of FTEs, and kind of the maybe juxtaposition or the integration of the permitting and the aquatic invasive species grant program. Like when there's a jump from the 0.5 to 2 FTEs, is that really an extra available 0.5 for the AIS grant program? Or is that like somebody that's in that area but doesn't have any more time, so it's not really an increase in staff for that program?
That's an actual jump. We worked really hard to carve that out. So last year, Kim was working on her own to run the program, and then we had half of Misha Setner's time to just do permitting. Misha's not going to do that permitting anymore, so we're losing him, but we're getting 100% of Olin Reed, who will split his time, 60% for permitting, which is what I estimate, and 40% to help Kim. So we basically get an extra 40% for the AIS work that Kim leads, and then 60% of Ola's time will be permitting. So it is an increase. It's a real increase. It's a small step in the right direction. Kim also manages, as you probably know, Hillary, a large number of seasonal techs, people we hire from June to October or whatever to do our summer field work, and that's a very heavy burden for her to train 3 to 5 people every summer. And so having more FTEs that we could train once and then get that payoff as they become better at their jobs over time would, of course, be preferable. Looks like Lori has her hand up as well.
Lori. Thank you, Oliver, for this presentation and for being so available. Some of you don't know, but Oliver really helped prep those of us who were speaking about AIS to the legislature and to the governor. So he had separate sub meetings and to assist us with that. So we very much appreciate that. And as you know, we are really trying to go to bat for this funding in various arenas. So, are grateful for you keeping those lines of communication open, and certainly have emphasized that it's not a good use of staff time to train people annually and see them go away. It does not build capacity. And while it's great, we have an additional, 0.4 of an FTE for E&O that's diminished from what we had back in 2012. And even that was too little when we had that, and we've got a growing problem. So rest assured, we're really trying to make that case very strongly in all these arenas. Going back to your point about the 25K from the general fund, I'm just wondering if you know what the genesis of that is, why it was only 25K, because it also seems like that's kind of administratively burdensome, 25K, why is it so low?
That's just me arguing successfully to fund one seasonal tech for 6 months out of general funds, a couple years ago, when we started using more of the motorboat funds for salaries, as we're allowed to. We didn't have to do that before because FTE salaries were covered by general funds back in the day. So we had more money for grants. When we started using the allowable MBR funds for salary, I said, great, can we at least get a trade-off and get one general funded seasonal technician? So my supervisor, our director for watershed, Pete Laflamme, agreed to that. So that's what led to having 25K of general fund for one seasonal tech. We have the other 3 seasonal techs are either funded by federal grants or MBR. So I'm glad that the state has some skin in the game. I wish we had a lot more skin in the game.
Right. Well, that's good to know where that comes from, because we have argued for more general funds, and just knowing where that came from and the reason behind it, it allows us, it's good you were able to shoehorn that in, and hopefully we'll be able to expand it to further. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my last words, I'll just say thanks for your support, Lori and others on the CAC, to advocate for these funds. I'll stop there. I know Meg still has to provide her presentation.
Lori, do we want to just touch base quickly, at least on the governor and Secretary Moore's response to our conversation, or you want to hold that?
Whatever would be most useful for Oliver and Meg and the people who go. You're more aware of the schedule in terms of when people have to leave. So,
I know Oliver, I think, is the one who has to step away first. I guess just a quick comment. I don't know whether 51 is going to make it through crossover, and that will be, relevant between now and our next meeting, and perhaps some discussions about how and where we push Clean Water Board, et cetera. But I would note that the governor was very aware and interested, it seemed, with AIS conversations. We noted that he's reluctant for fees, and as we sort of fleshed out the motorboat registration and how Maine or New Hampshire or others have used it, he pointed out that this isn't raising a new fee, it's just splitting a fee with a sort of a specific allocation for aquatic invasive species. So there was some, that felt positive to me. He seemed to be pretty aware of it. He seemed to understand that we were leaving, quote unquote, money on the table by not being able to leverage state funding to association funding. So in general, I think he was very supportive and open to that. He did mention potential shift in policy with the Clean Water Board. I'm not sure that's, I think it's both, right? Because it seems like we need to find a way to have specific funding to the tune of about $1.5 million a year in order to adequately fund aquatic invasive species. That's just off the cuff about the right number, it seems, to fund staffing, fund outreach, and I think 10 VSA 50 actually allows up to 75% rather than we might be hitting 25%. So just a quick, go ahead, Lori, and then I think we can go with Meg.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Mark. And he also asked a lot of questions about Round Goby, somewhat surprising because we had lobbied last year for more attention and his actual action on that. But he did ask a lot of questions. And I think the fact that so much is in play here with regard to Army Corps funding, and given that he asked us questions and we don't want to lose another year on this, I think it's good for us as a CAC to follow up with a letter to the governor on AIS, reinforcing those funding needs, answering some of the questions he had. Even though we answered them at the meeting, we can just take this opportunity because right now he'll kind of see, I think there's this tendency, we've presented the action plan, okay, done for a year. Yes, it was a good conversation, but we don't want to let it go at that. So I think it's good for us to come back with a follow-up. And maybe Mark, you and Katie and I can all talk in detail about that if the group is willing about, and Hillary, some people who are more involved in the AIS, and try and map out that follow-up.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can discuss it a little bit more later, but there does seem to be a ripe opportunity to get some movement on something we've been focused on for a long time. So, thanks. Meg, do you want to dive in on your part?
Sure. Thanks, Oliver, for setting the stage. And I think there have also been a lot of questions just across the watershed about the available funding. And I think that the Lake Champlain Basin Program Steering Committee has also been a bit responsive to the pressures that the Aquatic Nuisance Control Grant and Aid Program felt as a result of some reduction in funds in terms of increasing a little bit more funding available for our AIS spread prevention grants. So I'll switch over to talking about Round Goby and the Champlain Canal Barrier Project, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So we're continuing to meet monthly as a rapid response task force focused on Round Goby. The Quebec picture is this. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS have been helping to advise Parks Canada, who owns and operates the Chambly Canal, with the appropriate amount and location of round goby sampling in the Chambly Canal, which is a great addition. Quebec Ministry of Environment will continue to sample both through seining and through eDNA water sample collection. Our current round goby invasion front on the Richelieu River is known to occur with physical samples of round goby on the downstream side of the St. Ours Dam. Although there have been a few positive eDNA detections above the dam, there have been no physical round goby samples collected to date. That includes seining for round goby as well as exploring fish stomach contents for round goby presence in Missisquoi Bay and in the upper Richelieu River. The picture for the entirety of Lake Champlain, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service found funding internally to do a eDNA meta-barcoding project. They sampled from 70 different locations around Lake Champlain. They had hoped the results would be in last month, but they're not done analyzing yet, so they're going to present them to us next month. They've also been asked to consider if they have funding internally to conduct that same project or that same sampling scheme again in 2023 at the same sample locations to strengthen our data for that sample set. And then the Lake Champlain Basin Program Rapid Response Task Force Fund has been tapped. We are amending our contract with USGS New York to conduct 2 additional years of early detection monitoring for round goby using eDNA trawling and electrofishing. We've also included sample collection for viral hemorrhagic septicemia analysis in 2023 and 2024. That sampling will start as soon as the conditions really allow. We expect probably later next month. Both the Chambly and the Champlain Canal are scheduled to open on May 19th. We've had a lot of collaborations. We've reviewed the TARP, which is a threshold response plan for round goby with the New York State Canal Corporation and New York State DEC, looking at the different levels of responses based on where round goby might be found in the system. Currently, their invasion front is known to occur just on the south side of Lock C1. C1 is a little bit of a weak point because it has tainter gates that have to be removed in the winter. And so there's a period of time when round goby could move around it in more favorable conditions, like the end of the fall season and right at the beginning of the spring season before they put the tainter gates back in. So there's going to be a lot of increased electrofishing work done by New York DEC and USGS to take a look at that. And then our sampling will pick up. And this winter, lock C6 on the Champlain Canal was targeted for maintenance. And so just this past Friday, your chair and Katie joined our team to go tour Lock 6. It was really great because we had the director of the Canal Corporation and all of the important engineers and other staff on site. The Army Corps of Engineers came up, and then we had a great representation from New York State DEC as well as Vermont Fish and Wildlife showed up in the Basin Program. I'm just going to show you a few quick photos so that you get a sense of what it looked like. But basically, we all had hard hats and reflective vests, and we went down into the lock and really got to touch and interact with the infrastructure. We are inside the side sluiceways, and this is the valve door that's swung open, but there's some water and some ice in there. You'll maybe pick up some familiar faces in some of these photos. But it was really a successful day where they said, we're here to talk about goby. That was the Canals Corporation's words, and we talked about all these different components of the canal, and I'm getting a little giddy about these are the sizes of the sluiceways, and there's Mark, and Eric Reardon is our AIS outreach coordinator that we hired out of Warrensburg, New York DEC office. There's Katie. So we all got together and we talked for about 2 hours and toured to discuss round goby challenges and other types of mitigation measures that might be able to be implemented in the lock systems. Lock C6 is just a little bit different from other locks, but it was a great opportunity to get together and talk about talk about these issues. So I'll leave it at that and come back to what's happening with the Champlain Canal Barrier Study. Much of this team that you see here is involved in developing the scope of work for the phase 2 study. We've set up separate work groups to work a little bit more on developing stakeholder lists for the NEPA process. We're working on designing a survey so that we can gather the right information that we need to be able to design an alternative that accommodates a certain type of vessel. So it's called the Vessel Design Work Group, where we're going to look at all the different traffic that moves through the system and what the different alternatives could lift up and over different types of barriers, basically. And then we have another work group working on defining an economic study that would be a component of the phase 2 project. Right now we have the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Lake Champlain Basin Program, using Great Lakes Fishery Commission dollars, are ready to work through the Water Resources Development Act, Section 542, with local match to pursue this phase 2 study. And there's a dead zebra mussel in its byssal threads. That's like the coolest photo, holding onto the side of the wall. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop sharing there and come back to you all. Here you go. So that phase 2 study, the scope of work, we're hoping to finalize at the end of the summer and enter into contract. The Army Corps is optimistic that it'll be an 18-month process. I think we expect it'll take a little bit longer just from experience, but it is a really essential next step. And the other great pieces is that when the Water Resources Development Act was reauthorized, there was language included that really clarified, thank you to our congressional delegation, that all of the work that we're doing under Section 542 meets the intent of the Lake Champlain dispersal barrier language, which is under Section 5146. This is all nuanced, but what it means is nobody can say the work we're doing under this certain authority does not meet the intent of the other written authority. So we've worked all of that out. And we're moving forward, and we're meeting monthly. We're driving down to Albany to meet in person. We think it's really important in terms of, gathering input and garnering trust between the partners who are working on this phase 2 scope of work. I don't know if you had anything to add, Mark or Katie, from our adventures on Friday.
Katie, anything to add?
Meg managed to save a fish in that empty lock, so that was pretty cool.
There was like a trickle of water and this little fish flopping around. I was like, it has to be free. So I grabbed it and climbed the scaffolding and set it free.
That was great. I guess I'll just say it was pretty remarkable to actually see it and to hear the engineers and the folks who are actually doing the work for the maintenance and the operations. They're focused in trying to figure this out. They're definitely trying to think through ways of the double flushing. Could they do more to create more turbulence to really try to get them out? It's a work in progress. They definitely qualified that every step they take, they have some concerns that there's going to be a compounding other impact from at least their operational, but they seem to be moving forward a little more aggressively from the tone I heard a year ago, with trying to do better communications, education, outreach, signage, training of the actual lock keepers or the operators. So that felt better, and it did feel like there was some good FaceTime, literally FaceTime, for people that hadn't had a chance to be together and address sort of this urgently. And they seemed pleased about that. But there's still lots of work to do, and still a lot of risk that the canal could be the vector for the Gobi. So it was good work, and thanks again, Meg, for all of your leadership on that and sort of keeping their toes in the fire on getting stuff done.
Yeah, I'd agree. I just echo Mark that I feel like there is so much more work to do, but at the time, at this time, this tour, they said, we're going to focus on round goby in this tour. It seemed like there was a much greater acceptance that round goby is a problem, invasive species are a problem, and they're working on designing solutions. We have to evaluate the level of effectiveness that they'll have, but now we're working with a wider group of individuals at NIPA and canals, and there are more people engaged and involved in thinking about signage and how to interact with the boaters in the system, as well as, the anglers that might be on the side of the system. So it does seem like we have more engagement.
Yeah, and their communications people were there, and so it just felt like it was less of a PR event and more of an actual we're going to try to figure this out. And again, there's a lot more work to do, and I'm sure there's going to be pushback. They did mention that they were expecting more commercial traffic this year, which I was surprised at. I don't know why or what's happening, but I heard Michael, who's head of engineering, and someone else talk about an expectation of additional commercial barge traffic, which has been almost non-existent for the last 2 years. So we'll see what that looks and feels like.
Yeah, they did think that there was going to be stone agate shipments resumed last year, and that never came to fruition.
Right.
So any increase from zero, because it's been zero.
Right. Any other questions? Okay. Meg, thanks again. Katie is going to share the presentation. There's a narrative in the graphs that Oliver presented. He shared that with us just before the meeting, so she'll pass that along to everyone so that that's available for us as we talk more about how we might advocate and where we might advocate for a more focused funding for AIS programs, at least in the state of Vermont. So I guess one more thing is that there is some funding possibly available, and we'll follow up and connect with others through funding with the Hudson Express power line. That we heard the presentation at the New York CAC last week, and there was no Vermont representation within the working group or sort of the steering group on how those funds are allocated. And so I think there's an opportunity for CAC, Vermont A&R, DEC, or some of our partners to try to have some input into those working groups over this period, because it's not an insignificant amount of money. At least that's from what I could tell from a prioritized project was 1.5 million from the numbers that were presented to us. So, Meg, do you have insights on that?
Yeah, I think that they're estimating that there'll be $15 million made available in the first 5 years of the remediation funding, and that it's two groups that are looking at projects. There's a Hudson-based group and a Champlain-based group, and I do know that the Fish Tech Committee is very engaged and involved, and one of our lead contacts on the committee is Nicole Balk at New York State DEC, but she is doing very good outreach to Vermont Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Fish and Wildlife Department into looking at projects. There are priorities for funding. There's 4 priorities, which include like fish monitoring and assessment, habitat work. Invasives is one of the 4 priorities, and in there is mention of the Champlain Canal, and so that's also a priority, and we have some working groups set up to develop projects that are already identified in those funding priorities. And then on top of that, it seems that there's at least 25% of that first flush of funding that is available for new projects or emerging issues of concern. And I think that's a really important place that different groups like the Vermont CAC and the New York CAC could weigh in on other projects that could be important there.
Okay, thanks. we'll follow up again with that. Any more questions for now? I know a few of our members need to leave, so I want to go into our public comments and action item, and then see if we can at least get some date focused for retreat planning, because using our Agency of Natural Resources budget requires a couple months of lead time, and so having that date fairly well set now is important. Why don't we move to, let me look and see who's on. Any public comments? I see a few public guests. Do you want to introduce yourselves, or and if you have any input, any comments on anything on our agenda tonight? I'm happy to hear them now. Ricky? Oh.
You're on mute, Ricky.
Yeah, it's Rick Lauren from the New York CAC. I'm just trying to keep up on stuff. That's all.
Thanks, Rick. And who else I see? Just Joanne?
Hi, I'm Joanne Calvi. I live in Bombazine, or Castleton, Vermont, but on Lake Bombazine. And I was part of this group. I think I probably left around 2007, but asked to be remained in contact. So I've been kind of following it quietly, but I thought we've been involved down here. I'm with a group. We haven't, we're involved right now with House 31, which is trying to put a pause on treating milfoil in lakes until it's studied. So do a moratorium. And so I did see that it was on the agenda. So that's primarily why I joined it today. In the past, I was involved in the designation of the Poultney River as an outstanding resource, and was interested in the TFM treatments, and was very involved for a number of many years since the treatments were 1992 of the Poultney River, 1996, and this is with the TFM, and then 2007. And it was 2007 that the permits changed. So it was kind of, it was changed so that it was almost like, from my understanding, there weren't like public hearings and stuff like that. After that, it was just a process of the permit allowed for future treatments, kind of forever kind of type thing. So anyway, that's why I'm here, to try to just learn more information. And now that I have more time for this type of thing, I'm not working. In 2007, that was the recession. I took on a lot more work as far as being a district director in the Rutland County for public health. And so I may have time to, put more effort into this whole area that I'm very interested in. And my interest is freshwater, maintaining good freshwater. So it's just a steep learning curve at this time to really see what the issues are and starting almost over. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Thanks. We're excited to have you here tonight. Happy to talk more and share our work. I think you and I may have worked together back in '96 in the Poultney work when I was a young attorney at VNRC, and then with the Carver Falls dam relicensing projects and things like that. So nice to see you again.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting at that time. But I don't know, like the current work that's done on the Poultney River. Like there were many endangered species. I don't know, what the status of that is. So those are some of my interests. On Lake Bombazine, it's very very divisive issue as far as treating with for milfoil with a chemical. The towns don't support it. There's been 4 towns that do not approve of this. Fish and Wildlife Kehoe Center, the Board of Trustees does not approve of this. And, you know, and the whole process of having like a board, our LBA board, which has been very closed and kind of secretive as far as like there's been no public votes on supportive treatment. There's petitions of over 3,000 people that don't want to get treated. We hear from fishermen and people that work on the lake most every day, like the person that puts docks in and out of lakes all over this area, saying that our lake is in really good shape. Like the water quality is good, the fishing is really good. We understand Fish and Wildlife doesn't really support this treatment, and so those are the. So I am interested in the funding because it seems like, you know, if you have a limited funding, why would you want to treat a large lake that we've always worked and heard in the past was too big for chemical treatment? You know, why would you waste your money on that when we don't support it? So we haven't seen the evidence that it needs to be treated. We think there has been like kind of a, like we're living with it. It's kind of, there's an equilibrium between the milfoil. So I'd kind of like to hear those ideas from professionals, like is this thought, or am I just like dreaming this? Or is it possible to have like equilibrium between an invasive and other natural, I guess, natural weeds? So thanks for letting me talk.
Well, thanks, Joanne. Appreciate it. We're going to move into our first action item, and that's a review and approval of the January 9th meeting summary. Katie sent it out to everybody early this week, or last week. So I would like a motion from someone to accept them. We can talk about any edits and then move along with that.
So moved. Denise.
Thanks, Denise.
You're welcome.
So any comments on the minutes? Again,
Did we get a second?
oh,
I can second it, Hillary.
Thanks, Hillary.
okay, so now we can have discussion. Any comments or edits? Again, thanks to Katie for really great meeting minutes. They tell the story really well for those that can't attend. Hearing none, I'll ask to approve them. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Lori, is that abstaining?
I'm abstaining only because I wasn't there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's set. Next, we wanted to talk about our action plan timeline and retreat planning. And while we've got at least still have a good number of people, one of the conversations we've been having, and we attempted it this year, and I think we're doing better, is advancing our work on the action plan so that we can be more responsive to what's happening or not happening in the legislature and continue to be more effective in our presentations. So we thought that if we moved our retreat to our June meeting, it would be soon after the end of the legislature. We could review and look at what happened, what didn't happen. Did we feel like we were successful in in advocating our priorities and seeing something actually happen through the legislature, whether it's funding or policy change or whatever it might be. So June seemed to be the best. It put a little pressure on us fixing a date because then we need to start to work on a location and everything else related to our retreat so that we can go through the process utilizing the A&R procurement process. So if we were to have a meeting, I know that there were a number of people, but I think only 4 or 5 people responded to the doodle poll that was sent out. I think we were looking at.
Yeah, we had initially been targeting the week of June 19th, but I know Lori is booked that week, so I initially was not able to meet if we had scheduled it during the day of our regularly scheduled meeting on the 12th, but my schedule has shifted, so I don't know how that works for folks. But Lori, I don't know if you seem to have a particularly busy summer schedule, so I might put you on the spot and just ask if there are some dates in June that might work for you, and then maybe we can sort of work backwards with other folks.
Unfortunately, they don't, because I'll be traveling some of that time. And then I've been committed. May and June are pretty much every day is accounted for, and it's all tied into our field season. So I have no room, but I'm only one person, but I'm definitely an out if it's May or June. And it's something that I could potentially advance plan for, if I'm still on the CAC in 2024, but this is just too soon. I can't, I don't have the flexibility without compromising a field program that I can't afford to do.
Okay. Any other members have significant constraints or opinions about moving to June?
So working backwards, sorry, I just want to ask a question clarifying. So working backwards, when are we hoping to have the action plan drafted and ready to deliver to the legislators and the governor? Are we hoping to do that, while the governor's drafting the budget, or, and when is that? Like, do we have sight line into that, or all of those? I guess that's what's sort of popping up in my head, Mark.
Right.
As we're, I think what we heard from our legislators was really they would love to have that in hand prior to the session starting. I think my question is a little bit more clarity. I love this idea that right after the legislature gets out, we can kind of do a debrief on what happened, talk about, what of our priorities were addressed, where there's room for more opportunity. I think Oliver's case tonight was amazing. And I think that that's kind of the stuff that I want to look at and so that we can go in and say, look at what we used to fund these at. This is what we're funding at now. This is how much money we need to make up the difference. But I guess my question back to this team or the legislators that are on this call is like, when do we want to have an action plan in hand to start handing to people? Because I feel like we're coming in late when we show up in February.
Right. I don't think we have any more legislators in the meeting right now. I think Carol had to leave at 6. And I don't see her any longer. But if I remember correctly from, I think, Senator Brock and Carrie, I got the sense that if they had something, in the September, October zone when they were doing some initial meetings, wrapping up summer studies and in time, so that it was kind of getting cooked along in their thinking as they're working towards the opening of the session. So that was my sense was, before Thanksgiving, significantly before Thanksgiving, because they were going to start having conversations and, sort of setting the stage. So I don't know, Lori, do you have insights in that?
You're muted, Lori.
I think there are two pieces of information that are critical to this scheduling. And yeah, when is it? When, because some of those conversations were a little casual, we really kind of need, if we're going to plan around it, we need to be able to nail folks down and have that path forward, as Denise, as both of you have been noting. And I also think that it's really key to make sure that we have strong representation at the retreat by our legislators, because we want them, and we know that they, not everybody, they generally don't attend the meetings when we present at the legislature because they've got other calls on their time, but we do want them to be carrying water for us in other arenas and helping advance this and thinking about how some of these priorities can be integrated in existing bills.
Wayne?
Yeah, just for timing, I guess working it backwards, like so the governor's address and budget is pretty well nailed in early January. So I'm kind of curious as to when he would start that process. Is it 3 months before that or before? Because I mean, that probably kind of aligns a little bit with where we want to be and, when we want to have that ready. So we're not just hitting the legislators, but also the governor, lieutenant governor, and others there.
Right. Well, I do think it's that September, maybe October, maybe mid-October at the latest, but we need to nail down from our legislators on really when did they think that having that in their hands would be meaningful and useful for them. So I guess a thought might be that we take our June meeting for sort of a legislative debrief and see if we can get a commitment on dates, perhaps in July for the retreat, as we typically have. Hopefully, Lori and others can be enough advanced planning that we're ahead of that. So we've done some preliminary work on action plan in June, dive into it aggressively in our retreat, really make it a agenda item to try to flesh out a chunk of that time. I know we try to use that for some in-depth conversations and learning from others, but I think if we put a chunk of time together working with the legislators, confirming they're going to be there, to focus on action plan so that we could, have it in production in September for delivery, and we're using, our digital conversations essentially to flesh it out over July into August if necessary. But if we could walk away from a July retreat with focused action plan work, that might be sufficient and still try to get everybody engaged with a little more planning. Lori?
And one thing to consider, and this would be helpful to have the legislator weigh in on this, but I think maybe as we go forward and thinking about our game plan for the action plan, we want to be thinking about moderating our approach for where we are in the biennium. So, when you're in the first year of the biennium, it's more often introductory, particularly when you have a situation where we had this year where you've got a lot of new legislators. That's not always going to be the case, but that's where advanced planning is going to help shape that anyway. But then the second half of the biennium, we know what passed, what didn't. We'll have outcomes on age 31, age 51, right, and things like that. So we may consider, and I think it's important that there be some continuity in our opinion. We're not just going to shift. These are the priorities we put forward really for the biennium. But we know in some cases that there's a real critical timing here, say for AIS. And I'm not saying anything that excludes anything else, but what if we did for our action plan? And again, this is going to be informed by the June meeting and the retreat, but consider that the case statement that we really want to make in for the action plan for next year is reinforcing high priority for AIS, making the case for general funding, showing some of the information, the presentations that we've gotten from Meg and Oliver can be our bullet points. That's the real argument that we make. And then we still touch base on these other priorities. They can be shorter bulleted points, but we're really going to bat for this is what we want to get across the finish line in 2024. Just an idea, but rather than having it's really highlighting one aspect of the action plan. We can still be prepared to speak on all those other initiatives and weigh in on them. But in terms of what we want to influence for the governor's budget, what we want to have bills being really responsive to, we perhaps, and keeping in mind that we are a volunteer group, essentially, that might be an approach to consider.
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, our whole goal has been trying to be more effective at being successful with our action plan priorities, and some are recurring, and it certainly for AIS, it feels like there's an opportune moment. There's this convergence of events happening that we may be able to successfully get somewhere that feels like good sustainable funding and expanded program staffing in a way that we haven't seen in the last 10 years. So it may be that providing that additional focus, because we did talk about shifting how we approach the action plan to track more closely to the work of the legislature through a biennium, and really trying to get ahead of that. And so I like that idea. Again, we'll need to dive into the legislators and make sure that they're available and willing. We had good representation last year, and hopefully it can happen again. Eric?
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce what Lori said. I think she's spot on in what you just said, Mark. We just have to change up things a little bit, and I think that would be a positive way to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so if I'm hearing accurately, there's general agreement to focus on a wrap-up soon in June at a regular meeting, and maybe try to focus for the July retreat as an alternative to moving the full retreat to June. That way we can have better planning, try to assure better attendance, especially with legislators, and still stay on track. Give us a little more time to get the nuances of timing of budget development, understand those processes where we can influence and maybe be more effective. Is that generally how folks are feeling? Any other thoughts or alternatives to that?
Do we have a thought for the July date? Are we thinking the same night as our meeting, or?
Well, I think historically we've taken July and August off, and so I think we're pretty open for finding a date. So I think now it would be finding a venue and doing a doodle poll to see if there's a consensus date that works for most everybody. So I think that would be the first thing that we'd be doing, is saying, hey, we're shifting, we're going to look at July, here's some dates to consider, and see if we can get a consensus date for everyone.
And the last 2 years, it's been in the last 2 weeks of July.
Okay, that's the word.
Go ahead.
I do feel like if we are going to be if we are going to be drafting the action plan earlier, that we should not not have an August meeting, or at least have some committee work that's happening in August.
I agree. I think that we would still have action plan, working group, action plan, task force, whatever we want to call it, continue to do some work to wrap up, and then sharing edits and drafts with everyone, which I don't think requires a warned meeting to just, polish the work that we did at our retreat. That we can carry on with that work digitally, and then perhaps final edits, final proofing, everything at our September meeting, if after getting process and dates with governor's budget work, etc., next fall, if that seems to be in line. But we can always, I think we can be successful getting to where we need to go with a little extra work through August.
Yeah, and maybe Katie, you could just run that down with Sarah Coleman, or ask Sarah to run it down. But I believe, and Sarah, I think you're here, maybe you can just answer this spontaneously. But I think if we reference this as a task force, it doesn't have to be publicly warned. Denise, when you and I were tag teaming on that years back, I think that's what we did. And that's allowed. But we cannot call it a meeting. It has to be a task force.
Right.
But I think it would just be good to make sure that we're, check on that, so we're relying on current standards rather than hazy memory.
Yeah, that makes sense, Lori.
Okay. So Katie and I will follow up regarding a regular June meeting and then July retreat, and get a doodle poll out for a retreat, last 2 weeks of July, and also look for some clarity on, meeting issues, these open meeting, and then also, budgetary process within the agency, et cetera. So we'll try to get some clarity on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So let's see, it's quarter after. That puts us into our action plan presentation debrief. I guess I could start with some of it. I thought it was great to have the chance to be in person, and hybrid meetings, remote meetings for others. It was, I think it's most effective for us when we have those diverse voices taking components of the action plan and sharing them. It seems to be very well received by the legislative committees. The new House committee on ag was very receptive. A lot of new faces, new voices, new perspectives, seemed very receptive. I saw just the other day a farm diversification bill from Representative Supernaut coming out, looking to provide funding to small farmers for their diversification. So I hinted, I think I shared it with Hillary, and I said, I think they might have been listening to us. So I thought that was excellent. I think we had good conversations in all of our meetings, and again, I'll go back to the governor's. I think he was very, perhaps because the State House was empty, he was not distracted and very engaged with, I think, everything within our action plan. We obviously focused on AIS because it was an urgent issue, but the rest of our conversation, I think, ultimately circled back to his focus that it's about workforce and housing and that circular issue that everyone is facing. So I don't know, do Lori or anyone else, Karina, Hillary, anyone else want to weigh in on their perspectives or their thoughts on the meetings?
It was my first time, and I felt definitely I got better as I as I shared my little blurb more. So I appreciated being a part of it, and I think we all did a good job, and I learned a lot from everyone else. Thank you.
Yeah, somehow it felt a little more fun this year. I don't know why. Maybe I'm feeling a little more comfortable too. And the governor seemed so forthcoming. So I thought that was great. And he took more than twice the allotted time to meet with us, which I also thought was really nice. So I did think that went well. And I don't know if we should respond in some way about the funding to help farms diversify products and services. That link that you sent, Mark, because it was similar to what we were talking about. So I don't know if we should, I guess I don't know if as a group we should weigh in on that, or if a couple of us say that's a great idea, or how to handle that.
Yeah, I think that it's been challenging historically for the CAC to specifically respond to a specific bill in progress because of fluidity of it, and it's been tough for us to reach consensus. But I think a general note saying we're enthusiastic, or we're thanks for the opportunity, and it's great to see the committee taking on initiatives that are a priority for the CAC, but that may be a component. I doubt it's going to go very far, very fast, because I think it was just recently introduced, so it's sort of being queued up for the next session. So it might be better that we might be able to put more focus on it as part of our action plan for next year, as we're revisiting what occurred and what might be moving. So it's something we can talk about again.
I think just to add to what others are saying, I think, we had good reception. It was refreshing with also some of the ag committees, how they had a broader view in House Ag than of agriculture and the needs there, and were much more responsive than in some years past. I think there was across the board, there just seemed to be stronger engagement, and we had good questions. And I know I had some follow-up conversations with certain legislators. I'm wondering, I think there are also some opportunities for us to follow up, keeping in mind that we are a volunteer entity, but we have expanded capacity because we have both Katie and Sarah now playing roles with us. So I think one of the things when we're planning for our retreat and the action plan rollout for next year is just, okay, what are we going to do after we testify? We should follow up with every committee. I mean, part of that is just boilerplate language in some cases, but in other cases, like for instance, one of the things that was brought up with our conversation with Julie Moore was about different understanding about what is the hierarchy of use at our public access areas, which feeds into some of our points on access, and we should know that, and it's not clear, and we're still going to wait for that outcome. And so I reminded Julie of that in the meeting with the governor, but we want to be able to follow up on certain things. And similarly with the governor, this is an opportunity for us to circle back to him to, at a minimum, also just say, the Basin program, you had a lot of great questions about Round Goby, and give him reinforce that the Basin program staff, we're happy to meet with him again with the Basin program staff who is focused on this, and point out a few key things, and then make our case reinforcing certain elements that or responding to questions that came up. Certainly also with the Speaker of the House, we can be reinforcing that as they get towards the end of the session. So I think, strategically, we want to think about follow-up after we present.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Anyone else? Any
Oh, and Karina just asked me to share pictures. I actually, just before I went on, I sent the picture. So all of you should get a picture. I don't know who the staff person was, but who took it, but it's one of the group pictures for the governor, from the governor.
Thank you, Lori.
You are welcome.
Any other comments for now? Thoughts, questions? Anybody who might not have been able to attend have any questions for those of us who presented?
This is Denise. I think you all did a great job. It was nice to be able to be there. Sorry that I was unable to participate because of my voice, but great work. And hopefully next year I will be there in person. And I was very jealous of the governor's meeting. Could not make that date work or time. So great work though. It was, you guys, I like the going from person to like almost content experts, you know. And I think that's a really nice way to do it. It breaks it up a little bit and it gives everybody an opportunity to kind of share their pieces. Great.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Sorry that you couldn't engage more in your recovery, and we're sorry that Wayne, I know he really wanted to be part of that, and his schedule just didn't fit for any of the meetings, including the governor. I think it would have been great to get as many of us as we can, and looking forward to public or in-person meetings, and maybe a time where we could all gather at the State House again. Anything else on action plan? I know the follow-up is a key thing, and we can talk more about that. And I think certainly the follow-up on access and AIS were two key things that we asked about. I asked Secretary Moore to share what they have as it relates to septic systems, failures, et cetera, because as I've listened to Bob share his remarks that Vermont's, the winner again per capita, more septic fields, septic utilization than anywhere else. The last time the federal government used that data was 1990. There hasn't been any meaningful federal work on septic, and we know that Vermont and New England is a dominant user, places in Florida too. And so it'd be nice to have some of those updates. I know that parts of New York have done some more analysis, and I noticed that in the presentation that we had at the New York CAC, as they're looking at their water implementation plans as the precursor to the New York Lake Champlain TMDL that's coming up, they used it looked like the equivalent of our atlas, the DEC ANR atlas, and did a database search and overlay that they identified the parcels that had septic and were within 250 feet of a water body. And I wondered, I forget who I was talking to the other day, I wonder that might be something we might be able to glean from our present database, especially as some of that is being updated, these location of wetlands, et cetera, some of the work that Karina was talking about. So I think that might be valuable as we're trying to sort out, how are we working with these systems, and how are we all in on educating, outreach, et cetera, on septic issues as it relates to water quality. And as Bob notes, we're we're land applying PFAS through our septic systems and everything else, not just the PFAS forever chemicals, because we are tend to be eating up the landscape and using septic systems rather than building infill development. So we'll try to follow up with that. And you know, Hillary or Karina, if you guys are working in that and know that database maybe better than I, it'd be interesting to see whether there's an opportunity to use that for septic. I'm waiting to hear back from Julie on that too, so we'll follow up.
I love that idea, Mark. And certainly the ANR Atlas, the wetlands updates are, I think, at least for Franklin County, are coming online in March, or as we speak, hopefully. So that should give us more information to work from, at least in that area, as it relates to wetlands and septic overlay.
Great. Anything else as we're getting ready to move on to our next?
Mark, I was just going to say that some of those septics are dry wells too. So you kind of have to go door to door maybe to get that information. But as we get more lake-wise assessment results, we might be able to figure out like what percentage of septic is still dry wells, because that would be really helpful information too, since that's not treated particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, that's some of the information I was hoping we could get from wastewater division, is their sense of, as we've evolved the potable water supply and wastewater disposal permitting necessary, and we've, you know, we just have that much more data, parcel by parcel data. It'd be interesting to see where the database is lacking information, right? And then begin to extrapolate what some of those issues might be. But I think the tools are there. I was impressed that they could focus and use the tool in on a parcel by parcel basis in New York. And I got to imagine that we've got equal power within the overlays that we might be able to create to have better information, or at least show where here's where the information's lacking adjacent these waterways that are, you know, areas of concern, and see if we could get some more focused information gathering there too. So let's see, anything more?
This is Bob. I guess I'll weigh in. Yeah, I just want to say I thought the meetings went very well. And, you know, having been on this a long time, there are certain reoccurring themes like AIS. I would be supportive. There are many different items that we touch upon that maybe not all of us completely agree on, but I don't think I think all of us agree on that. So I'd have no trouble with being fairly aggressive from the CAC per our original mandates, and pursuing that.
Good. I think we can develop a little more consensus as we see what's flowing from the legislature and making through crossover, and decide whether there's specific aspects that we can really develop a strong consensus to take action on. But I agree. I think for as long as I've been on the CAC, increased funding and better staffing for AIS work, and improved access, particularly in the South Lake and non-motorized, have been consistent and unanimous consensus from the CAC. So, all right, unless there's anything else on action plan, timeline, retreat, etc., or our presentations, we've got a membership and governance discussion that we wanted to have. We have 2 available public at large memberships that are open. I'd have to really go to school on whether any potential candidates would be filling open positions or not. I think they've been open long enough that they probably are fully expired, and they would be, you know, full 3-year full terms. I have asked Sarah and Secretary Moore, and I think I may have mentioned it to Emily Bird, that a number of you have terms that have expired as of the end of last month. I think I heard from everybody an interest and willingness for reappointment, so I asked Emily to expedite that and let us know if we needed to do anything more. I don't think you need to go back onto the governor's website and fill out all those forms again. I really just asked them to expedite that because we just went through this not that long ago. And people were reappointed for terms that had been already expired for over a year or so. So the catch-up didn't amount to much of an extended term or extended time on the committee. So as governance, we've often used our retreat to appoint and elect chair and vice chair, and for a number of years we focused on developing a vice chair role that would step into the chair role, and I would expect we'd be doing the same again this year. Denise stepped into the vice chair role anticipating that she might have time and availability to take over the chairperson role over a year or two, and I think we'll continue to have that conversation unless she's decided she's too busy with the day job. As far as membership is concerned, our focus has been to try to have good regional representation and also a diversity of voices. I think in one of our last meetings, there was some conversation about continued strong municipal representation. We lost a chunk of that with Jeff's departure, that he brought a great perspective and a lot of experience in and outside of government, and certainly Director of Public Works and an ex-mayor in Rutland. And also Southern Vermont representation. So that was an area that we wanted to explore. We've talked about just continue trying to have a more inclusive approach to how we seek and recruit. I don't think we've done a lot of follow-up on how the Basin program has begun to look at their DEI initiative and how it might be applied with the CAC, or even how the states work on equity and inclusion might be applied for our work. That's something that we might try to bring in over our next meeting or two and just get an update and see where and how our efforts at recruitment might play into, I guess, a consistent statewide or a consistent basin program approach to shifting our practices, shifting our language, et cetera, around more inclusion as we're seeking additional members. So, I mean, for now, it's a call to give consideration to folks in your networks to consider where and who might be good candidates for these two open membership seats. anyone have any thoughts on membership governance changes now that Karina's had a year and a half into being a member and has had some experience? Any thoughts or anybody on us moving forward with seeking new members and filling the rest of the capacity of the CAC?
I don't have any thoughts. I'm curious how it's been done in the past. Like, I know my membership, I think, was David Mears stepped down and you know, he recommended me, and that's how I found out about the membership. So I'm curious how other people have become members and how that's worked. I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
I think it's been word of mouth mostly.
Yeah, that's essentially how it's worked, is that there's been movement, you know, folks deciding that they for whatever reasons didn't have time or capacity to continue with the work of the CAC, and offered recommendations for folks to consider. Again, we've tried to, at a minimum, have diverse regional representation. So, you know, there's been times we said there's more than enough folks from the greater Chittenden County, Northwest Vermont region, and let's look for folks in central Vermont and southern Vermont, or looked to someone with some expertise and perspective, whether it's farming, water quality work, a whole suite of that. I might ask Katie. Katie, did you, with your work in advancing New York CAC and sort of reinvigorating their membership, did you all use a I don't know, a document or a spreadsheet of sorts to try to support the search for new members?
Yeah, so in the early stages of the process, I had all of the members sort of tick down their areas of interest in a spreadsheet so we could see, or expertise where that was all shaking out, and where we might want to focus some energy on recruiting folks from I have to say, like, it's mostly been word of mouth for the New York CAC too, even with the new members that have come on. So I can't speak to some new process that they've taken on yet, but I have to find it in my documents, but I'll share out what our DEI consultant Carmen had put together in terms of committee recruitment and possible strategies to employ there.
Okay, thanks. And Sarah Coleman, if you're still on, are you aware of anything that the state has been working on that might help us as we're thinking about recruitment and inclusion? Has the state made enough progress with their work?
I think I need to get back to you. I know that there's a lot of work on inclusivity on multiple fronts, and can see if there's any specific guidance around recruitment for committees like the CAC. And I think Katie reaching out to Carmen, the consultant from the Basin program, is also a good strategy.
Right. Do members feel it'd be helpful if we sort of did a similar check the box of areas of interest, areas of expertise, and just sort of do that assessment and see if there's obvious geographic or interest, sort of sector voices that we might want to, that might become apparent, we might want to then hone in our recruitment? Do they think that'd be helpful?
Yeah, hi, this is Bob. Sorry, it's hard. I don't good service here. Yeah, 100%. It's always kind of been an underlying theme since I've been on for maybe 15 years or something, that, different geographic areas, different sectors, it's never been really, documented, but it's always kind of been an underlying theme, what you just expressed.
Okay. Well, I think that perhaps we might do a little survey just to put it on paper and get that sense. And then we've had these open for 5 months, 6 months. And I think it'd be great if we could each of us think about, from where we sit and as we've participated in meetings, and get a sense of other voices we might like to hear as part of our regular meetings, and the expertise that might be brought in, and think about it from geographic region and sort of that talent review, and come up with some names and folks who might be available, and try to bring it to our next meeting, or at least share it with Katie and Denise and I to start with, and we can begin that process. I think if we create maybe a working document that could be shared amongst all of us to, a Google Sheets or a SharePoint or something, that we might be able to get to where we want to go a little bit faster. Any other thoughts on that? My computer is whirring and all of you are frozen. Can you still hear me? Let's wait for some action. It's acting up. It sounds like it's overheating. All right. So I think that as far as that's concerned, we should, Katie and I will work on getting a quick survey out, get some feedback from people, and create a working document that we can begin to utilize to try to consider, and then start that process of getting a few candidates up, and then start the process with the governor and Secretary Moore to get that, get folks on board. Anything more in governance or membership right now? All right, let's move to our next meeting. Next meeting is scheduled for April. It will be, where are we? April, is it April 10th?
Yep.
We wanted to get some follow-up. We initially tried to reach out to get some follow-up on the Governor's Commission on the Future of Agriculture, to see if we could get someone to present on that recent report. And I think I'd like to keep working on that. Are there other urgent topics that folks would like us to explore, and getting any presentations or any follow-up? Hopefully we'll have some of the follow-up on our request from the action plan, and we can sort of carry on with some of that ongoing business. And I'm, Access and AIS are two of the biggies. But any other items or issues that we've been talking about that folks would like us to try to get a presentation on?
Mark, Denise, did you mention the, um, is that what you were just talking about when you were talking about AIS, the not using weed killer in the lakes, basically?
We didn't,
Do we, I'm asking because I have a constituent that's asked about it as well.
yeah, we've had a couple folks that have asked about it, and I guess we could look into the status of that. I know I had a quick chat with Eric, who's the AIS coordinator in DEC. We were talking, he was aware of it, and we were talking about Proselicor's use in the Adirondacks and a few other places. So, I mean, it would be timely to try to get the some conversation on sort of the state of the state, state of the science on that. So we could reach out and try to figure out if we could get some good people to get to an April meeting. I suspect there's been some solid presentations in the House already as that bill is moved through, so we could see if we could get some folks who might have presented there and for a more focused conversation with us.
I think that would be
Bob,
great.
I'd be interested in having Eamon Tuhig, Vermont Residuals Management. He knows everything about septage and biosolids that's going on, PFAS. I think it'd be fairly informative for a short session.
Who is that, Bob?
EAMON, Eamon Tuhig. He's in charge of residuals management.
Okay.
Tuhig, I think TWOHIG. He'd be able to tell you all sorts of things that I couldn't possibly.
Okay. All right, so we'll focus on that. I know I would like to have some more follow up on where are we with understanding septic better. It seems like a lot of the data is very old, or at least our awareness. So that's something that, if not for April, maybe May, we might be able to have a chance to get back. And I'd love to know whether that septic overlay could be gleaned from the parcels, and in the same way that New York DEC did. So that's something that I was thinking about, maybe not for next, but for the May meeting. I think it'll take a little bit longer to figure that out. So those are some good suggestions for the next meeting. Anything more?
No, I feel like in June we want to do the debrief of the legislative session.
Right.
That's in June, and then July we have our retreat where we're beginning our action planning. August we don't meet, but we might have some committee work to do. September should probably be action planning with maybe another presentation. I'm not sure, but if we're going to try to get the plan done by September, we should leave some time for some approval and final drafting. It's pretty much the next 6 months there, Mark.
I agree. It's it pretty much sounds like the I was going to say rough agenda, but it's probably pretty much the agendas for our next 3 or 4 meetings. So that gets us through the summer. But that's why I want to be sure that if there was any sort of hot button issue that folks wanted to try to get in play, that we had a chance to slot that in, at least topic wise, to be able to get someone to come in. So
I do have a follow-up question from the letter that we sent to Secretary Moore and the Minister of Quebec. Have we received any feedback on that yet? Did I miss a meeting where that?
Reminding me. Yeah, we did receive feedback, and in essence, both governments said that they would be making a presentation to the Lake Champlain Basin Program as is required and articulated in that agreement, and that they then that would be sufficient to provide public a public update and an opportunity for public question and answers. We pushed back again and said we think that a meeting, a presentation at a meeting of the steering committee is not the appropriate audience, place, time for a really good public presentation on the status of what's happening vis the aligned efforts of the two governments. Pierre relayed to me that at his General Assembly meeting recently, that his public meeting, they doubled down and said this is just totally inadequate for what we were asking for. So I haven't had any follow-up from our follow-up letter asking them to please consider a true public meeting, and that one that included French translation, a timing that provided more opportunities for citizens to participate, so presumably an evening time. We haven't had any follow-up. In the meantime, there was a meeting recently. I haven't had any follow-up and don't know, Katie, if you can share anything. There was a meeting with the Basin Program folks about what the Vermont and Quebec governments, how did they intend to make a presentation and make it public? I think in the afternoon of the June steering committee meeting for the Basin Program, Eric and I were uninvited to that meeting, or Pierre and I were uninvited to that meeting. So I don't know, Katie, whether you and May Kate can provide any follow-up or whether that's still being worked on to be able to give feedback to us.
Yeah, I did not know you were uninvited, so sorry about that. Pierre, excuse
Aren't
me,
you
Eric
our
said,
representative at the executive committee meeting, Mark?
I am.
Yeah.
This was a meeting that was to try to sort out what the presentation to the steering committee would be. And so it really was for Basin Program staff to figure out what their role was going to be in supporting the Quebec and Vermont government's presentation to the steering committee. And that's sort of separate from reporting to citizens on what's going on. And so given our pushback, I think they wanted to just have a conversation so they could sort it out a la Basin Program staffing logistics.
Got it. Okay.
So it wasn't completely I'm not sure what the polite word.
But essentially you're saying there's no presentation currently planned for the I'm trying to get an agenda, right? There's no presentation currently planned for the CAC to receive from the Quebec or Vermont governments on phosphorus updates in Lake Champlain.
No,
Okay.
well, in Missisquoi, and no,
Missisquoi, sorry.
except that you will be invited to attend the steering committee meeting.
All of
remotely
us?
or in person. Yes, and that's how the logistics are trying to figure out how they can make that a quote unquote, all meetings are public, but quote unquote a more public meeting so they can effectively disseminate that. And both Pierre and I relayed that, of course, we realize that we will have to use whatever tools we have to sort of rally the citizen troops to be able to be aware of and attend those meetings. But typically, I don't know, I've been going to steering committee, executive committee meetings, steering committee meetings, and maybe once or twice there's been a non-steering committee member there and present who wasn't involved in a presentation or wasn't specifically invited to be there. So it's just not common that it's a very public meeting, and which is why we pushed back and said it's just an inappropriate venue and inappropriate audience. So we haven't heard back, and I guess I'd go back to Katie. Any follow-up for us yet, or should we wait for more formal follow-up?
I would still wait. It sounds like everybody's still thinking about things. So in the meeting last week, we mostly talked about what the June steering committee meeting presentation would look like. So that presentation, I think, is going to come in the afternoon at the end of the meeting, and will be about 90 minutes, including time for questions. So Vermont's going to give a Missisquoi focused version of the Clean Water Initiative Performance Report presentation that they provide to the state legislature in January. That'll draw from the Clean Water Portal webpage also. And Quebec will summarize their previous work on water quality in Missisquoi Bay. We'll talk about their upcoming action plan, and we'll likely have some updates from the ag departments, including documented phosphorus reductions in Missisquoi Bay. So yeah, it's not, we didn't talk at all about those broader public presentations. So I think this is step one in those presentations. And yeah, I'm not sure what the conversations are on the other side about what will or will not happen with that request for more public presentations.
So will we get an invite to that meeting on our calendars, Katie?
Yeah, I'll make sure of that. And that I will push for that too, because I did ask how we, as the Basin Program, advertise our steering and executive committee meetings, since they are public meetings. And it sounds like people just need to look at our events page, which I imagine there's not a whole lot of that happening. So I can continue to push for making that more public and giving ample time for people to have that on their calendars and be aware of it.
But I think our larger message here is that while, we're happy to be invited, we don't see this as the public meeting that we asked for.
Yeah.
And that the CAC does not see us as representing broadly the community voices, that there isn't being, so far that meeting isn't on their agenda, and we still feel it should be. So even if we're able to show up at that meeting, that's not checking the box for us.
Yeah, and I think they are hearing that message. What happens next, I don't know.
Right. It's just, we want to give you fodder, Katie. I know you're, a neutral force in this, but you can convey that as, as recent as this meeting, we are reiterating, that we still want that other meeting.
And Pierre's most recent meeting was the same tone and tenor. In fact, I would imagine it was a little more, yes, disappointed tone and tenor, because it's taking place across the border and wasn't specific plans for French translation. So we're going to keep working on that. It sounds like Pierre and OVBVM are going to press hard. He has been putting a lot of pressure on Natalie, and not been successful. So we're going to have another conversation, and Pierre and Walt Lender, who's the new chair of New York CAC, we're going to have a conversation, since all three CACs made that specific request, really focused on, this is about our governments sharing with the citizens a public presentation on the work they're doing, their progress or challenges, and how they're mutually aligning their efforts across the border. And
I think the dream was, Mark, that it was going to be everybody together in one room, right? And we would have French translation. We'd be able to, that was my sort of envisioning when we wrote that letter and signed off on it.
Exactly, that there'd be a way that we could do that. And perhaps, because the June meeting is scheduled to take place in Swanton, that, there was at least some proximity to the border, that we might be able to engage more people. Pierre and I were like, maybe we just need to go to Tyler Place and have, one of Pixley's sons push really, really hard and invite everybody and offer food so more people came, something like that. So we'll talk more. Maybe it'll be part of our retreat. We'll do it. Although the Tyler house is totally overwhelmed in July. So yeah, Denise, I was going to reach out to Kent and a few others up in the Bay on the Vermont side and see if we could get some stronger participation and support for where we are with sort of a broader network there. So if you have any
Okay.
thoughts, let me know, Denise. We can talk offline.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, we're at our 2 hours. Thanks again to everybody, and particularly for the chance to get down to the State House this year. I think the action plan was really great. I think we're making progress on our advancing our attempts to be more effective sooner and continuing to do so. So I thought it was excellent, and it felt good for me that there are some very clear, actionable priorities that we can continue to make follow-up on, and hopefully see some really positive results on some of the work we've been doing for a number of years. And AIS is a good target right now, so I'm thankful for everybody being able to be strongly supportive of that effort, and it feels like we could have a nice win, and maybe it falls to a lower priority in our next action plans. I doubt it will ever fall off our priorities. Any other thoughts or comments before we part?
I just shared 2 links in the chat. So the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the Champlain Basin Education Initiative are hosting a World Water Day event this Saturday at the Champlain Center Mall in Plattsburgh, and there will be over 20 partners who work on water quality issues, tabling and doing exhibits and interactive things and all sorts of stuff. So there will also be a free screening of No Other Lake at Regal Cinemas there at 11 a.m., which is pretty cool. And then the other link is just to the Lake Champlain Management Cooperative State of the Lake Fisheries meeting happening on March 25th, also in Plattsburgh.
Great, thanks. If folks haven't seen No Other Lake, it might be worth a drive over to Plattsburgh for a free screening. It's a really great film. I don't know if they've added in the qualification at the end that don't do this. This is really bad idea. I know that Jordan heard the feedback on it. I just don't know whether they've made any qualifying comments or edits to it. But paddling through a full-blown algae bloom is unsafe at any speed, I think is how I termed it. So.
That's a really good point, Mark. And maybe Katie can just ask that, we're making that recommendation since the Basin program did fund that. And there is an educator's toolkit. The last time I looked at the toolkit, that wasn't there. And, LCC was certainly involved in this project. And I trained Jordan on cyanobacteria monitoring and identification. So, it is a really important message, and there's just getting a lot of showing. So I think that's a part, not only a statement, Jordan's often at these showings, so it's important for him to put that in context but it also be part of the written narrative.
Right.
Because we don't, it's lucky, but the end shots are also, there's cyanobacteria on his legs,
Yeah. He found himself in an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
I guess an organization I work with, the Rosalia Project, is doing a marine debris cleanup in Burlington Harbor and then sorting the debris and doing their database. And then I think they're taking the materials and doing an art exhibit on Church Street on Earth Day. So we'll follow up with more details on that, but it's another event, April, what is that, 21st, 22nd?
22nd.
22nd.
If it's on the actual Earth Day.
I think that's when it's happening, but I'll clarify. It's tangentially related to some of the work that we're doing, but it's definitely a water quality issue as we're focusing on marine debris and the foam bill that's floating through. So we'll follow up on that also. Okay, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone.